good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kiran Kuppa. I'm Senior Solutions Architect based out of Dallas, Texas. I've been with Amazon for about 5 years now. So for today's topic, right, we're going to talk about security. And since the theme of the day is security and compliance, what I would like to talk about is we're going to do a quick overview of security services within AWS platform. And since there are quite a bit of services that to talk about, and 30 minutes is probably not going to be enough time, what we're going to do is we're going to cover two of the newer services on the AWS platform, which is Amazon GuardDuty and AWS Security Hub. And we will also take a look at some of the customer use cases on how essentially customers are using the services to essentially remediate the vulnerabilities and the other issues that you typically see inside your AWS environment. So again, this is assuming that most of your audience are familiar with at least the basics on the AWS side, on what an AWS account is and what some of the other AWS services are. So with that assumption, I'll move forward. And again, before we go deeper into these services, right, let's take a look at like a quick strategy of security services within AWS platform. So if you, again, this is essentially this whole setup of different services are more predicated on the NIST cybersecurity framework. So if you look at these 5 different functions, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover, these are the parts of the framework assigned by NIST cybersecurity. And we have, if you're seeing this, all these different services are essentially aligned towards that framework. So if you look at the details of these different services, again, as I said, like we won't be able to go through every single service in this list here, but again, at the initial identify, right? So identification is essentially, it's all about identifying your key assets and resources. Like there are services like Systems Manager and AWS Config, and these are the AWS services that will essentially help you understand how the environments are deployed and what are the different services there. So once you've identified, it's important to essentially protect your services. And there are a bunch of different services, anywhere between IAM, which is Identity and Access Management, to encryption services, to firewalls and other pieces. And essentially that's a protection piece. Now, the services that we're going to talk about today essentially fall under the detect category. And the services that we will talk about today is GuardDuty and Security Hub. So this is where we will put our concentration on. And then again, once you identify or once you detect if there is any kind of a vulnerability that is in your environment, then we essentially try and respond to that, and we want to automate as much as possible, along with investigative process looped into the thing. And then finally, we essentially, once we move forward, then we want to recover from that as quickly as possible. And this is where there are AWS services that can essentially help you quickly respond by spinning up new services and replacing the existing ones. So with that being said, let's take a look at the problem statement, right? So again, most customers, when they start on AWS platform, they usually start with 1 or 2 accounts. Like it could be a production account and a dev test account. But as you grow and keep growing in the AWS platform, you might end up, and actually you will end up in multiple different accounts. So again, think about it in terms of mergers and acquisitions, or there might be scenarios where your footprint is growing. There might be a different business unit. There might be a geographically dispersed business units that might warrant for different AWS accounts. So once you have like a multiple AWS accounts, and again, think about in terms of there might also be some accounts which you might be acquiring as part of merger and acquisition. And these accounts, you essentially don't have a whole lot of control on. So they might have been set up based on different frameworks. They might have been set up in a very completely different way than your internal security standards. And if you think about it, like let's say, for example, there might be one instance in that newly acquired accounts. And in this particular instance, suddenly starts talking to some other random server in the environment that it was not supposed to talk to. And it's kind of exhibiting some kind of unwanted behavior. Like, how do you catch this particular unwanted behavior in a large set of AWS accounts, and that is buried in multiple different event logs and multiple layers of logs in real time? And how can you act on it swiftly? So how many tools do you have that are actually set up to aggregate and parse all these different events in order to react? Like, and how many of these tools will actually scale to the need? So this is essentially the problem statement. If you also look at along with that, the other parameters that also are very important is that along with that, you might have like different compliance perspectives or compliance frameworks, and each essentially each one will require its own set of rules and regulations. So, for example, think about in terms of NIST or HIPAA or PCI, and there might be also some other internal customer needs that essentially the customer has to set up for the industry best practices. So, and most of these customers also have like multiple different security tools. So if you look at the security landscape, there are so many tools out there today. And sometimes all these dozens of security tools, and they keep emitting so many different alerts for every single thing. Now, if you look at how many security alerts and different formats that each tool has, that essentially poses a really big problem for the customers, where you have so many tools with so many different formats. And if you want to make any sense of any of the logs, then all you have to do is then simply take those logs, not parse those logs, and normalize the data, and which is essentially a huge heavy lifting on the customer side. And at the same time, you have way too many alerts. Like all these security tooling is providing you with various different alerts. It could be as granular as per second, or it could be as granular as per 5 minutes, right? So we can essentially keep collecting these alerts. And the larger the volume of alerts, it gets more and more difficult for you to prioritize and take action on those alerts. And again, that's usually another challenge. At the same time, again, because you have a bunch of different tools, every tool has its own console and own mechanisms. So the lack of integrated view for security and compliance across all the accounts is extremely important. Having that single pane of glass visibility is kind of something that we are aiming for. So this is where we're going to talk about two different AWS services. We're going to start with GuardDuty. So again, Amazon GuardDuty essentially is a threat detection and notification system. Notification service. So what GuardDuty does is essentially it's a managed service to detect threats. And what it does is essentially it's a service that continuously monitors for malicious and unusual behavior. It goes across multiple accounts as well at the same time, as well as multiple workloads. So think about GuardDuty as a tool that you set up, and once you set it up, you essentially set it up across multiple different accounts. And what it usually takes care of is it usually takes a look at all the unusual or unwanted API calls. It can also filter through potential unauthorized deployments. Let's say, for example, there was an account compromise and there was a weird behavior that's happening where more and more resources have been spun up, or maybe even like unwanted API calls like SSH calls or port probing and other calls have been made to those accounts. It also can detect and potentially compromised instances and any kind of reconnaissance by attackers. Like even before the attack, it can essentially detect for reconnaissance activity as well. So what does GuardDuty take in terms of logs? So essentially, GuardDuty solves a very specific problem. Again, the data sources that GuardDuty can help with are VPC flow logs, DNS logs, CloudTrail logs, and AWS S3 data event logs. So these are the 4 logs that can essentially be continuously monitored and analyzed. So from VPC flow logs, you don't need to, they don't have to be turned on to generate findings. Data is consumed through an independent duplicate stream. And again, this essentially provides information about your network communications for real-time threat intel and behavioral detections as well. So from the DNS logs point of view, they are based on queries made to Amazon EC2 instances to known and unknown questionable domains. So DNS logs are in addition to Amazon Route 53 query logs. So these are again additional logs where Route 53 is not required for Amazon GuardDuty to generate the DNS log. So we essentially have are not causing any performance impact for your logs or for your service. We essentially take that information from our backend and we provide you with the analysis for through GuardDuty. Again, from AWS CloudTrail history of API logs, you can essentially take a look at all the events that are happening inside your account. For example, let's say I made an API call to maybe modify IAM permissions or maybe modify EC2 instance permissions. So any kind of API call that is made essentially is tracked by CloudTrail, and GuardDuty can alert based on that as well. So again, it essentially intelligently detects the security risks. And again, what it does is in the backend is the nice part is it essentially uses machine learning and provides you with anomaly detection. So what that means is, let's say, for example, if there is an EC2 instance that is being accessed by a certain IP addresses all the time, we essentially take that as a baseline. And if any activity happens against that baseline, we automatically take that information and we provide you as an alert. For example, if this machine now is getting accessed by a random IP from a different country, or maybe different continent, or maybe different place altogether, we essentially see that as an anomaly in terms of how this machine was accessed previously. So we do that baselining, and we use machine learning to essentially mark that as an anomaly for you. So what are the different services, right? So essentially, it's a one-click activation. There is no performance impact on the services where the log aggregation is happening from, so you don't have to worry about that. It's fairly easy. You go into the console today, you can click on activate GuardDuty, and it automatically picks up all the configurations. It essentially provides you with continuous monitoring across all the different AWS accounts and resources. It can also provide you with global coverage of the region, along with the regional results. So global coverage, essentially think about it in terms of if you are using multiple accounts within multiple regions, then the aggregation can happen at one single place. And you can also look at the regional results as well. So you can essentially apply down filters to see where the events are coming from, and who essentially needs to access what events. It helps you with detection of threats from, it's threat-based intel. Like, for example, we are partnering with different vendors as well to get the threat intel. You can also create your own threat intel if you have, like, let's say, for example, some customers have their private information where they essentially create rules on where the machines are accessed from, or any kind of threat intel that can essentially be attached to GuardDuty as well. It also detects unknown threats, like behavior-based, as we talked about earlier, essentially uses machine learning for that. And the idea is to essentially give you an enterprise-wide consolidation for all the threats in one single location. So when it comes to the details of Amazon GuardDuty, what it can detect, essentially, if you look at the way that this service is set up, we essentially work with two vendors today, which is Proofpoint and Crowdstrike. And these are the partners who are essentially helping us with the threat intel, and we is integrated with the service itself. So with Amazon GuardDuty, you can again, at AWS has its own security intel, so we use that. We use open source and partners, which is Proofpoint and Crowdstrike, and you can, as a customer, you can provide your threat intel as well. Now, when it comes to what are the things that you can actually detect, right? Again, any known malware infected hosts, it can detect anonymizing proxies, it can detect sites hosting malware and hacker tools, cryptocurrency mining, and all those things. So unknown threats is also something very important. So having known threats is one part of the story, where you can essentially purchase the threat intel from different vendors or partners, and take that information and apply that to your environment. However, what about the things that we don't know about? Like, this is the very first time that this threat has happened, and we need to identify them. So this is where the machine learning algorithm come in play. Essentially, we take about like 14 days to baseline your system. So once you enable GuardDuty, again, think about it in terms of, it does not immediately provide you with all the intel with the results. It takes about like 14 days to go through the different logs and essentially baselines it for you. And after that, essentially, anything that if there is a signal that, or a signal pattern that essentially appears, which breaks the patterns, the machine learning algorithm essentially goes in there and identifies that as a threat in the console for the users. Now, when you look at the different types of findings from a compromise standpoint, they fall under like 3 different categories. So the first one is essentially reconnaissance, where these are the things that happen before the attack, like port probes, or if you're looking at like inbound from Tor traffic, if you're looking at maybe user permission discovery. So essentially, these are the things that happen before the attack. And the next 2 categories are, again, the next 2 are more of a post-compromise activities, something that's already happened. Like if you're dealing with any of these issues, then it's like something like instance compromise, which essentially happens at an instance level or a virtual machine level, where it could be a denial of service attack or spam attack or Bitcoin activity and different things. But also it deals at the account level compromise as well, which essentially understands the unusual network permission changes, or let's say, for example, CloudTrail logging is disabled, or maybe somebody is trying to log in at the root account level and try to get into the account. So those are the 2 layers that essentially those are the 2 levels of threat detection classes that GuardDuty provides. Now, when it comes to the threat detection classification, so we when we create the findings, we create them under under certain purpose classes, and like of what the attack is going to do. Like, let's say, for example, if the type of attack is like a backdoor attack or a behavioral, or maybe it's a stealth attack, or maybe a Trojan, essentially it has some of those different classifications, and we can provide you those details in the console. Now, if you look at the console itself, this is how the GuardDuty console looks like. As I said, it's a very simple one-click enablement. Once you enable that and add different accounts to that, this is how these are some of the details that you can actually find. So you can consume these details from the console, or you can even consume them through an API call. So if you see the types of findings here, if you're able to read the screen, probably too much detail in here. But again, on the right-hand side, it actually gives you all the details. It gives you that threat class. It gives you the details of source, the resource, the region, the account, and the source of attack as well. So another thing that we do is, instead of throwing at you all these different alerts that are happening, like think about it in terms of a particular alert, it might happen at a much higher frequency than you want to see on your dashboard. So what we also do is, if you look at the aggregation, we actually essentially count them, and we can provide you with an aggregate instead of providing with every single alert in that console, so that it's actually much easier to consume as well. So let's say, for example, if you open up port SSH port on an EC2 instance, then it might be under constant attack, and it will be like thousands of requests coming to that per minute. And we essentially take that information and we put that into account, and we give you a summarized information. You also have options to filter and save them as auto archives if you want to, and you can also suppress the findings as well. Let's say, for example, if there is a certain set of activity that's happening, and you know it's probably not that important, or maybe that's something that you expected because you are doing some testing on a backend system, then you can essentially suppress those findings as well. So those are the different options that are available. So as I said earlier, again, that's the console view. You can also consume these the same information through it's available through a JSON format as well. So you can run an API and essentially pull the exact same information, and you can put that and send that information to another analysis system if you want to. There are other partner services that can integrate with the JSON files, and if you already have an existing service that can essentially take in JSON files and process the information, then you can do that as well. So again, from the threat information, you can get the severity, the region, the threat type, the count, and you can also take this information, you can put in CloudWatch events as well, and where you can create your own custom alerts for that. Again, when you're reviewing the findings, right? So again, if you know what a CloudWatch is, essentially CloudWatch, think of it as an event bridge or a service bus, where you can essentially collect all the logs and then export them and store them for further analysis as well. So Amazon GuardDuty can help you aggregate all those. Again, you can also decide on the granularity of it. It could be like a 1 minute or 5 minute intervals, or even to a single event, right? Every single event can be grabbed out, and you can take that information and you can export it to another AWS service, or maybe a partner service if you want to. It's not just about finding the alert or finding the vulnerability or finding the threat. It's also important that we actually want to act on that threats. So to act on the findings, essentially we are working with over 20 different partners that have integrated with Amazon GuardDuty today, and you can essentially take automated actions based on that. So think about it in terms of, like, if you want to integrate it with another SIEM solution, then you can absolutely do that. So the way that this works is the GuardDuty essentially collects all these logs and sends those alerts, and you can use a service called CloudWatch Events, which is as a service bus. And that information now can be taken, and we can essentially send alerts, and based on a certain alert, we can write Lambda functions and take that information, run the Lambda function, and essentially mitigate those issues as well. So we can essentially take different paths on how we want to remediate. So from the automation point of view, if you want to automate incident response, again, these are the 3 services that can help you do that as well. So AWS Lambda essentially is a service that can run a piece of code to remediate the findings. So think about it in terms of, let's say, for example, a security group has to be modified. So based on the rule match, if you identify a problem, then you can create an API call through a Lambda function that can essentially go and automatically either block or unblock that particular IP address. Systems Manager essentially is another service where if you are looking to get a deeper dive machine level information and act upon things at a machine level or an EC2 instance level, then you can essentially use AWS Systems Manager to run commands remotely to the machine. So that you can essentially take operating system level configuration changes automatically. Amazon Inspector, again, it's another tool where essentially you can automate security assessments of your EC2 instances. Moving forward, how would this look like, right? So if you want to do automated incident response, then essentially the logs are coming from GuardDuty, the GuardDuty findings, and essentially it goes to CloudWatch events, and then you can essentially take the Lambda functions, and we can aggregate the Lambda function, or we can aggregate the logs, we can aggregate based on rule match and things like that, and then the action could be, again, it could be different things. You can essentially send to another partner solution, or it could be an automated response, or it could be anything else. So running Lambda functions essentially gives you that level of automation. So here's one example, right? So this is an example of if you're like, for example, you're getting a port probe, let's say, on your Amazon CloudFront. So the way this works is essentially Amazon GuardDuty sees it, and you can take that finding and then use step functions, or maybe or Lambda functions or step functions, and then you can essentially automatically create a block list, IP block list on an AWS WAF. So the idea of this is essentially taking that information and automatically changing the WAF rules so that it can either whitelist or blacklist depending on your need. Here's another example where if you don't want auto remediation, but you essentially want some kind of a human responder in between. So we have something like let's say for example you want to do the investigation. So what you can do for a particular instance is as soon as you find a rule match from your findings, you can kick off a Lambda function that can go and start querying at an EC2 instance level where it can run different commands. At the same time, you can also take a volume copy of or a snapshot of an EVS volume. So the one use case would be like, think about in terms of forensics, right? So in terms of forensics, you can take that information and you can create another volume and you can attach it to a forensic instance where running a forensic instance would be an isolated machine, and you attach this volume so that you can freely open up that machine or DBS volumes and start looking at different details to come up with the root cause. So that's another use case. So another use case would be automatic remediation example would be like, for example, if you, this is a fully automated and stateless architecture that there are no EC2 instances anywhere in the mix. Again, if an instance is compromised, then you automatically want to detach the instance from auto scaling group and load balancer. You want to remove the IAM role. You want to take a volume snapshot. You want to replace the security group and do multiple things and then terminate the instance as well. So all of these things can be automated using different services. So now that we talked about like GuardDuty in terms of what it can provide, so how do I monitor like threat detection with a single pane of glass? Like where is my single console where I can aggregate all of these different blocks together? So this is where we want to talk about a service called AWS Security Hub. And AWS Security Hub, the way that it works is essentially it can be turned on again with a few clicks. It automatically starts aggregating security findings and alerts from our core AWS services like Amazon GuardDuty, Macie, and Inspector. So the center box, if you're looking at the services, it's Amazon GuardDuty, Macie, Inspector, and it also works with integrated partner solutions as well. So one special thing about the services that is that the findings from both AWS services on partner tools are like pushing to in a standard format called AWS Security Finding Format. So if you think of the problem statement earlier we talked about was, hey, I got these bunch of different tools and each tool has its own way of reporting and each format of the logs is completely different. Now we tried to standardize that using something called as AWS Security Finding Format, and the partners that we integrated with, they essentially provide us the findings in that particular format, so that which means you don't have to worry about parsing them separately, or you don't have to worry about how to understand those different findings. It will also provide you with insights. We will talk about insights and other details in a quick second. But again, the idea is to reduce that amount of burden on the user side, where you can consume alerts from different tools in one single location. Again, it also provides you with automated compliance checks, like CIS, AWS Foundations benchmarks. Again, it's not just a visualization tool. We'll talk about that in a few seconds as well, where you can actually integrate with various different ticketing systems and stuff. With that being said, again, what does Security Hub give us? Essentially, it gives us a centralized and centralized view, and essentially helps you prioritize the findings without needing to normalize them, which means that essentially all the information is already normalized for you, so that you don't have to spend additional cycles for that. It gives you a view of security and compliance posture against different standards, so that you don't have to start implementing your own security checks based on different standards. So it automatically comes out of the box. Again, you can take the automated action on those findings using a very similar approach that we spoke about earlier, which we'll be using like CloudWatch events. So from the partner integrations point of view, we've integrated with over 30 plus different partners under different categories. Like again, these are not just like paper integrations where you can just either import or export logs. These are actually been through like rigorous integrations to give you a meaningful integration. So these fall under various different categories. Like if you're looking under firewalls, you've got like F5s, Palo Altos, and Purva. If you're looking at vulnerability management systems, you've got Tenable, IO, and got Qualys. If you're looking at taking action, then there are different services that can essentially take action or run those API commands on your behalf for those instances to auto remediate. If you're looking at endpoint protection, we partnered with like again companies like Crowdstrike and Symantec. From the compliance point of view, there's Checkpoint. Again, so there are other partner integrations that essentially help you integrate your existing services, because more than likely most customers are using either one or more than one of these partners already. So we are trying to make it as easy as possible. Here's an example of CrowdStrike. So the CrowdStrike is essentially an endpoint protection company, right? So again, it uses, so the way that we have implemented the solution is that it uses a CloudFormation template to be deployed into your AWS environment. So there's a Python app that essentially goes and collects the findings from EC2 instances via agents. So these agents are essentially sending that information, and the information is automatically enriched, and the data is automatically sent to, and data and the findings are actually sent to Security Hub. It takes about 10 to 15 minutes to run this integration. So it's fairly quick. It's not a complex process to set them up, and so we have essentially automated as much as possible in integration with different services. Another partner that we integrated with is AlertLogic. AlertLogic, again, the way this works is from the customer's AWS environment, all the information or any findings that are on the AWS platform, they essentially are sent to the AWS AlertLogic account. And then the AlertLogic automatically pushes only the important and filtered out alerts back to the Security Hub as findings. So that you don't have to be inundated by like thousands or even millions of findings like every minute or every day. So essentially the idea is we take that information, inspect the information, process the information at AlertLogic, and then it essentially sends you a summary of information that can be populated on your console in AWS. So from the Security Hub point of view, again, a fairly easy setup. You can simply go to Security Hub and you can start enabling it. So what are the different details that you get out of Security Hub? So when you look at the Security Hub, essentially it provides you with insights. So think of our insights is a collection of related findings. Like Security Hub offers managed insight using filters that can like further tailor for your unique environments. Like for example, if you have an EC2 instance and it's missing multiple different security patches, or any other important vulnerabilities, or if there is an S3 bucket with the read and write permission issues, then essentially the results are actually correlated and presented to you as a summary under insights. Going further deeper into insights, like it will provide you with the identity of which ones are your highest priority as well. You can essentially prioritize them as well. So think of it, it's essentially a correlation of stacking rules that consists of like filtered chips as we call them. So this is like one of the examples where AMI you need to focus on, and that can be like bubbled up on the dashboard so that you know that this is the one that is important and needs immediate attention. So from the multi-account setup view, again, it essentially works with multiple accounts as well at the same time. So you have the ability to create or enable it from one account and invite the other accounts to be part of the same console as well. So Security Hub essentially gives you that multi-account integration. So from the standards point of view, essentially we are using two frameworks in this case, where the first one is the AWS Foundational Security Best Practices, and then there's the CIS AWS Foundational Benchmark. So your environment is actively being compared against these benchmarks, and it automatically tells you your security score, and it also gives you a detailed results of what are the things that you need to really work on and what are the things that you can ignore. Like for example, in this case, this is for the CIS benchmarks. It essentially uses like 43 different fully automated continuous checks, and it can actually tell you on the right-hand side of how many percentage of the rules are actually compliant versus how much is non-compliant. So it goes into the details of each one of them, and you can click on each one of those alerts, and you can actually go and remediate them as well if you want. So from the response and remediation point of view, much like GuardDuty, again, Security Hub findings, you can take them and essentially run it through CloudWatch. And upon a rule match, you can have your own automation built out with either with Lambda functions or systems manager or with step functions. And it's not just only for taking an action. The target could also be things like sending a chat message or sending it to a ticketing system or sending it to the on-call management or source solution platform. So different things can be automated in this fashion. So again, Security Hub action taking partners, as I mentioned earlier, we are partnering with multiple different services, and essentially will give you integration so that these services can actually act on your behalf to go and auto remediate your vulnerabilities. You can also create like custom actions within Security Hub. Like for example, if you have to send an email, or if you need to isolate an environment or instance, or if you need to disable security keys and things like that, then those things can be are called custom actions, and they can be enabled as well. So again, the biggest takeaways, right, from this whole presentation would be like, if you're looking at automatically evaluating your compliance against key standards with one click, this is what these two tools are providing you with. Again, with large number of accounts and large number of tooling, having a centralized mechanism or a centralized view of all the different findings without having to worry about too many different formats is what we're trying to solve for. Again, it's not just important that you identify these findings, it's also important how you want to prioritize depending on the intensity or the impact of these different vulnerabilities. So that is something that we need to, that is something that is automatically flagged out for you in the console so that you can automatically take action on them. Again, these are not just visualization tools. You can actually create your finding. You can take your findings. You can like either automatically or semi-automatically, however you want to call it. You can essentially create that loop to go back and fix the problem, which would be like either a security group change or NACL change or IP whitelist or blocklist. Those things can be done. So again, the idea is that we are trying to bring all these different services together and put the vulnerabilities and the information, everything in one single location so that you can have the threat detection capabilities within the AWS platform at a multi-account level.